The stars looked different from inside the glass cell. Lieutenant Alan Hayes blinked slowly, trying to clear the fog from his mind. His last memory was of piloting his ship near Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. Everything after that was just darkness, until now. He sat up carefully, noticing the strange metal bands around his wrists. The room around him was perfectly round with walls that seemed to glow with a faint blue light. There was no visible door. The floor was smooth and cold under his hands. "Subject is conscious," said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere, and nowhere at once. The words sounded English but had a strange buzzing quality, like they were being forced through a translator. Alan stood up slowly, years of military training kicking in. "Stay calm. Assess the situation. Look for escape routes." He was still wearing his Navy jumpsuit, though someone had removed his boots and equipment belt. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear building in his chest. "Who are you?" The air in front of him shimmered, and then a figure appeared. It was tall and thin with skin that looked almost see-through, showing faint outlines of organs underneath. Its head was large with no hair and eyes that were solid black, 3 times bigger than human eyes. "I am Commander Vekthar of the Zoraxian Imperium," the creature said, its thin lips barely moving as the translated words filled the room. "You are aboard our research vessel." Alan's heart raced, but he kept his face calm. He had been trained for first contact scenarios, though nothing in those training sessions had covered being taken against his will. "Why am I here?" he asked. "You are part of an important study," Vekthar said. The alien's head tilted slightly to one side in what might have been curiosity. "We have been studying Earth and humans for many cycles. Your species presents unusual traits we wish to understand better." The wall behind Vekthar became clear, revealing more aliens watching from the other side. They were taking notes on devices that looked like thin sheets of light. Alan counted 6 of them. "I don't consent to being studied," Alan said firmly. "I demand to be returned to my ship and my people." Vekthar made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Consent is not required for scientific progress. You were chosen specifically, Lieutenant Hayes. Your psychological evaluations show exceptional mental resilience. Your physical condition is peak human standard. You represent the best test subject for our purposes." A smaller alien entered the room through a section of wall that simply disappeared and reformed behind it. This one had a slightly greener tint to its skin. "I am Scientist Kelra," the new alien said. "We will begin the assessment phase now." Alan took a step back. "What does that mean?" Instead of answering, Kelra held up a small device. The bands on Alan's wrist suddenly felt warm, and he couldn't move his arms. "We will test your physical limitations first," Vekthar explained. "The process will be uncomfortable but educational." The floor beneath Alan began to heat up. Slowly at first, then faster until it felt like standing on hot coals. Alan gritted his teeth, refusing to jump or show pain. "Interesting," Kelra said, making notes. "Pain response suppression is active. Temperature now at level that causes burns in most species." Just as suddenly as it started, the floor cooled. Then it began to grow cold, dropping well below freezing within seconds. Alan's breath formed clouds in front of his face, but he remained standing, focusing on his breathing techniques from survival training. "Remarkable temperature adaptation," Vekthar commented. "Most subjects show more distress." The temperature returned to normal, but then the gravity changed. Alan felt himself becoming lighter, then heavier, then so heavy he could barely stand. Through it all, he kept his eyes on Vekthar, refusing to look away. "Your resistance is noted," Vekthar said, "but physical endurance is merely the beginning." The tests continued for what felt like hours. They tested his reaction to different light levels, sounds, even smells. They took samples of his blood and scanned his body with strange devices. Through it all, Alan remained as calm as possible, answering their questions with only his name, rank, and service number. Finally, they left him alone. Food appeared through a slot in the wall, something that looked like blue gel. Alan was hungry, but he didn't touch it. Rule 1 of captivity: don't accept anything if you can help it. He sat in the center of the cell, cross-legged, and began to plan. The aliens seemed interested in his breaking point. That gave him leverage. They wanted something from him. And wanting something meant making mistakes. Hours later, Vecthar returned with 2 other aliens. "You have not consumed nutrients," the commander observed. "I'm not hungry," Alan lied. "Falsehood," said one of the new aliens, this one with a red marking on its forehead. "Human physiology indicates hunger." Vecthar moved closer to the glass. "Tomorrow we begin psychological assessment. Physical discomfort is simple. The mind is where true breaking occurs." Alan looked directly into those large black eyes. "You picked the wrong species to try breaking, Commander. Many species believe they cannot be broken," Vecthar replied. "All have been proven wrong." "Humans are different," Alan said. "That remains to be seen," Vecthar said. "Rest now. You will need your strength." After they left, Alan finally allowed himself to feel the fear and anger he'd been holding back. His situation was dire. He was alone on an alien ship millions of miles from Earth, being treated like a lab rat. But there was one advantage they didn't know about. Naval intelligence had suspected alien observation for years. All deep space pilots had been implanted, with emergency transponders that activated under specific stress conditions. His had likely been broadcasting since his capture. Whether anyone would receive it or be able to help was another question. But Alan knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't break. Not just for himself, but for all of humanity. Whatever these aliens wanted to learn about human breaking points, he would make sure they learned the wrong lesson. He looked up at the strange stars visible through the ceiling of his cell. Somewhere out there was Earth, and he made a silent promise to see it again. The Zoraxians wanted to break a human. They were about to discover why no one succeeds. Alan woke to the sound of humming. The lights in his cell had dimmed to simulate night, but now they slowly brightened again. He had no way to tell how long he had slept, or even if it was a new day. The Zoraxians could be manipulating the light cycle to confuse him. He had finally eaten some of the blue gel after testing a small amount. It tasted like nothing but seemed to satisfy his hunger. His mouth was dry, and as if reading his mind, a panel opened in the wall and a clear container of water appeared. Alan approached it carefully. The water looked normal, but he had to assume they might drug him. He took a tiny sip, waited several minutes, then drank the rest when he felt no effects. The wall of his cell shimmered and Kelra appeared with 2 other aliens Alan hadn't seen before. "The physical assessment phase is complete," Kelra announced. "Today we begin cognitive and emotional testing." Alan stood straight, squaring his shoulders. "I won't cooperate." Kelra tilted its large head. "Cooperation is not required. Observation is sufficient." One of the new aliens stepped forward. This one had markings around its eyes that reminded Alan of glasses. "I am Observer Nix Tell," it said. "I specialize in psychological responses." Its voice had the same mechanical translation quality, but there was something colder about it. The third alien didn't speak but carried a device that looked like a silver helmet with wires coming out of it. "What is that?" Alan asked, unable to hide his concern. "A neural mapper," Kelra explained. "It will not harm you physically, but it will allow us to create accurate simulations based on your own mind." Alan backed away until he hit the far wall of the cell. "Stay away from me with that thing." Nixatel made a gesture with its long fingers, and suddenly, Alan couldn't move. His body felt frozen in place as the silent alien approached with the helmet. "Resistance is normal," Nixtel said, "but unnecessary. We could force compliance, but observation shows that fear of the unknown causes more stress than the procedure itself." The alien placed the helmet on Alan's head. It felt cold against his scalp. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then images began flashing through his mind faster than he could process them. Memories from his childhood, his military training, faces of people he loved, places he had been. The machine was scanning his mind like a computer hard drive. When they finally removed the helmet, Alan slumped to the floor, exhausted and nauseated. "Excellent data sample," Kelra said. Subject has strong emotional connections to family unit and military colleagues. Fear responses are controlled but present. The aliens left, but Alan knew they were still watching. He sat on the floor, trying to steady his breathing. The invasion of his mind felt worse than any physical test they had put him through. Hours later, or maybe minutes, time was becoming hard to track. The walls of his cell changed. Instead of the glowing blue, they showed images. Alan found himself sitting in what looked like his parents' house back in Ohio. The details were perfect. His mother's collection of bird figurines on the shelf, the worn spot on the couch where his father always sat, even the smell of his mother's apple pie. Alan, honey, are you feeling okay? His mother walked into the room, looking exactly as she had when he last saw her before his mission. Alan's heart pounded. He knew this wasn't real, but it looked and sounded so perfect. You're not my mother. The image of his mother frowned. Of course I am. You're home on leave, remember? You've been acting strange since you got back. Alan closed his eyes. This is a simulation. You're not real. When he opened his eyes, the image of his mother was still there, looking hurt. Alan, you're scaring me. Should I call the doctor? For a moment, doubt crept in. Could he have imagined the abduction? Was he having some kind of breakdown? No, he said firmly, more to himself than the simulation. The Zoraxians created you from my memories. This isn't real. The image of his mother flickered slightly, confirming his suspicion. Then the scene changed completely. Now he was in a military hospital. He looked down and saw his legs were missing, below the knees. A doctor who looked like his old commanding officer walked in. I'm sorry, Lieutenant. The explosion took both your legs. Your military career is over. Alan felt a momentary panic before steadying himself. Another simulation, not real. The scene changed again and again, each time showing him scenarios designed to provoke fear, grief, or hopelessness. Sometimes he was injured, sometimes his loved ones were in danger. The Zoraxians were testing his emotional breaking points. Between simulations, they returned him to his cell. Alan began to do push-ups, sit-ups, anything to keep his mind focused on reality. He recited poems, sang songs, and counted in different languages. Anything to stay mentally active. After what felt like days of this treatment, Vekthar returned to his cell. Your resilience is noteworthy, the alien commander said. Alan was tired and hungry, but he stood up to face Vekthar. Is that a compliment? An observation, Vekthar replied. Most subjects break after experiencing the death of loved ones in simulation. Humans know the difference between reality and fiction, Alan said, and we've been telling scary stories to each other for thousands of years. Vekthar seemed to consider this. Perhaps direct sensory manipulation will be more effective. That night, they removed all light from Alan's cell. Not dimness, but complete darkness. Then they removed sound, even the sound of his own voice when he tried to speak. Then temperature sensation. It was like floating in a void of nothingness. Alan lost track of time completely. He couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't feel. But in his mind, he began to build an entire world. He imagined himself sailing on a lake near his hometown. He remembered the feel of the sun, the sound of birds, the smell of the water. He walked through his memories in perfect detail, using his imagination to keep himself company. When they finally restored his senses, Kelra and Nixtel were watching him with what seemed like confusion. Subject maintained neural activity patterns inconsistent with distress, Nixtel reported. Even in complete sensory deprivation, Alan smiled slightly. I wasn't alone. I had my mind. Kelra made notes on a light tablet. We must reconsider our approach. This subject demonstrates unusual psychological flexibility. As they left, Alan felt a small sense of victory. The aliens didn't understand what they were dealing with. Humans had evolved on a dangerous planet, where imagination was as important for survival as physical strength. They didn't know that his mind was his strongest weapon, and they had just given him time to sharpen it. 3 weeks had passed since Alan's capture. at least according to his own careful tracking. He had created a system by counting his meals and sleep cycles. The Zoraxians had settled into a pattern of testing that allowed him to roughly measure time. Alan sat on the floor of his cell, watching the aliens through the glass wall. They didn't always hide their presence now. He had begun to recognize individuals by the patterns on their skin and their movements. He noticed hierarchies among them, the way junior scientists deferred to Kelra, and how everyone yielded to Vekthar. Something had changed in their approach. After failing to break him with simulations and sensory games, they now seemed more interested in observing his daily behaviors. They watched him exercise, eat, and even sleep. Alan had started talking to himself, partly to maintain his sanity, and partly because he suspected the translation device might pick up useful information. Today, something different was happening. The aliens were agitated, moving quickly and speaking to each other without using the translation system for Alan to hear. "What's going on out there?" Alan asked loudly. No one answered, but one of the junior scientists looked at him with what might have been alarm. Alan filed that reaction away in his growing mental database of Zoraxian behaviors. Hours later, Vekthar entered his cell along with Nixtel and a new alien Alan hadn't seen before. This one was smaller with pale yellow skin instead of blue. "This is lead researcher Zorvin," Vekthar announced. "The High Council has sent her to evaluate our progress." Alan nodded at the new alien. "Nice to meet you. I'd shake hands, but I'm a prisoner in an alien lab, so forgive my lack of manners." The translator device made a strange sound, like it was struggling with his sarcasm. Zorvin's large eyes narrowed. "The subject uses humor as a defense mechanism," Nixtel explained. "It is a common human trait." "Not defense," Alan corrected. "Offense. Humor is a weapon." Zorvin moved closer, studying him. "Explain." Alan smiled. "Humans use humor to reduce the power of fearful things. If we can laugh at something, it has less control over us." The aliens exchanged looks. Their facial expressions were hard to read, but Alan had begun to notice subtle changes in the color of their skin that seemed to indicate emotional states. "We have reviewed the test results," Zorvin said finally. "Your resistance is unusual. The Council is concerned about the implications." "What implications?" Alan asked. "If one human cannot be broken, perhaps none can," Vekthar said. "This would require significant revision of our containment strategies for your species." Alan absorbed this information carefully. It was the first clear admission of why they had taken him. The Zoraxians saw humans as a potential threat. Why contain us? "We haven't done anything to you." "Precautionary measures," Zorvin said. "Your species advances quickly. In 300 cycles you went from primitive combustion engines to crude space travel. The pattern suggests you will become a galactic presence within 100 cycles. And that scares you," Alan said, realizing it wasn't a question. The aliens didn't respond, but their skin darkened slightly. A reaction Alan had begun to associate with discomfort. "We will try a new approach," Zorvin announced. "The subject will now observe us." This was unexpected. Alan watched as they activated a large screen on the wall opposite his cell. It showed images of what must be the Zoraxian homeworld. A planet, with 2 suns and vast oceans of something that looked thicker than water. The cities were built in perfect geometric patterns with nothing out of place. "Your civilization is impressive," Alan said truthfully. "It is ordered," Zorvin replied. "Unlike Earth." The images changed to show various Earth cities, the chaotic sprawl of New York, the unplanned growth of Cairo, the mix of old and new in Tokyo. Alan realized they were showing him this as evidence of human inferiority, but he felt a surge of pride instead. "Earth is beautiful because it's not perfect," he said. "We adapt to our environment instead of forcing it to adapt to us." Zorvin made a dismissive gesture. "Inefficient." The screen changed again, now showing Zoraxian children in what looked like a school. They sat in identical positions, learning in perfect unison. Then it showed humans in a playground, running in different directions, playing different games, some arguing, some laughing. Alan began to understand something important about his captors. Your species doesn't handle unpredictability well, does it? The translation device made that strange sound again, and Vecthar quickly deactivated the screen. Enough observation for today, the commander said. But Alan had seen something crucial. That's why you can't break me. You keep trying the same approaches because you can't imagine alternatives. Humans are constantly imagining alternatives. It's what we do best. Zorvin's skin flushed a deep blue. The subject is attempting psychological manipulation. No, Alan said. I'm trying to understand you just as you're trying to understand me. The difference is I'm succeeding. After they left, Alan paced his cell, thinking about what he had learned. The Zoraxians were highly advanced, but rigid in their thinking. Their society prized order above all else. This explained why his unpredictable responses to their tests confused them so much. He also realized something about the translation device. When he spoke literally, it worked perfectly, but sarcasm, idioms, and humor caused it problems. This was a weakness he could exploit. That night, as Alan pretended to sleep, he heard the translation device activate. Vecthar and Zorvin were talking outside his cell, not realizing the system was picking up their words. The council is concerned about the time investment, Zorvin was saying. 42 cycles and no progress. We are making progress, Vecthar argued. We understand more about humans than ever before. Understanding was not the mission objective, Zorvin responded coldly. The containment protocols must be tested and verified before their expansion reaches our outer territories. I request 10 more cycles, Vecthar said. This subject shows unusual properties that warrant further study. There was a pause before Zorvin answered. 5 cycles. Then we implement the terminal protocol. The translation device switched off, but Alan had heard enough. Terminal protocol didn't sound good. He now had 5 days by his count to find a way out, or at least to send a clearer message home about the threat these aliens posed. He closed his eyes and began to plan. The Zoraxians didn't understand humans, but he was beginning to understand them. And knowledge, as his old commander used to say, was the most powerful weapon in the universe. Alan woke early on the first day of his 5-day countdown. The lights in his cell had barely begun to brighten when he started his exercise routine. Push-ups, sit-ups, stretches. He needed to keep his body strong for whatever came next. But today his workout had another purpose. The average human can survive 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food, he said loudly while doing jumping jacks. But the human mind can survive forever if it has hope. He knew they were watching and listening. His words weren't for himself but for them. Human children learn through play, he continued, moving to lunges. Our games teach us to think around problems, not just through them. When a human child builds with blocks, they're learning to see possibilities. He paused, catching his breath. Want to know why humans tell jokes? Because laughter helped us survive as a species. We laugh at what scares us, and it makes us brave. 1 of the junior scientists appeared outside his cell, watching with obvious curiosity. Alan smiled and waved at the alien. Good morning, or whatever time it is for you. I'm giving a free lecture on human psychology. Want to join? The alien didn't respond but didn't leave either. Alan took this as encouragement. Here's something interesting about humans. When you try to break us, we don't just resist, we grow, stronger. We have a saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Your tests haven't been breaking me, they've been training me. The junior scientist moved closer to the glass. Alan noticed its skin had lighter blue patches, a sign of interest he had learned. You're Mikalor, right? Alan asked, recognizing the alien from previous observations. I've seen you taking notes. You're more curious than the others. The alien seemed startled at being identified. How do you know my designation? I pay attention, Alan said. Humans are good at recognizing patterns, even in new species. I've been studying all of you while you study me. Miklor's skin rippled, with color changes. This behavior is unexpected. That's what makes humans interesting, Alan replied. We do the unexpected. It's our greatest strength. The conversation was interrupted when Vekthar entered with Kelra. They seemed angry to find Miklor talking to Alan. Return to your station, Vekthar ordered the junior scientist, who quickly left. Kelra approached the glass. Today we begin new testing protocols. Alan nodded calmly. More simulations? Or something new? We will test your problem-solving abilities under stress, Vekthar said. Previous subjects from other species showed cognitive decline when faced with unsolvable problems. Alan smiled. Humans love unsolvable problems. We've built entire branches of mathematics around them. They didn't respond to this, but activated a panel on the wall of his cell. A complicated puzzle appeared, symbols that shifted and changed as he looked at them. Complete the pattern, Kelra instructed. You have limited time. Alan studied the puzzle. The symbols weren't in any language he recognized, but they seemed to follow a logic. He began to see connections between shapes and positions. As he worked, the floor beneath him heated up, not enough to burn, but uncomfortable. Another distraction tactic. He focused on the puzzle, ignoring the heat. The symbols were beautiful in their own way, complex but orderly. Very Zoraxian, and that gave him an insight. Your species values symmetry, he said as he worked. The pattern must balance. He touched the final symbols in what he believed was the correct sequence. The puzzle flashed green and the floor cooled. Correct, Kelra noted, sounding surprised. Moving to next level. The puzzles continued, each harder than the last. With each one they added new distractions, noise, light flashes, temperature, changes. Alan solved them all, sometimes quickly, sometimes after long thought. What the Zoraxians didn't understand was that humans were used to solving problems under stress. It was practically the definition of human history. After hours of testing, they finally stopped. Alan sat on the floor, tired but satisfied. He had noticed something important during the tests. Each time he solved a puzzle, a small light on the wall panel flickered. It wasn't part of the test design. It was feedback from the system itself. When Vekthar and Kelra left, Alan waited until his cell was minimally monitored before moving to the panel. He had been planning something for days, waiting for the right opportunity. The puzzle interface might provide it. He tapped the panel in the same sequence he had observed Kelra use to activate it. Nothing happened. He tried again with a slight variation. On his fourth attempt, the puzzle system came to life. Alan smiled. Predictable patterns were a Zoraxian weakness. He had no access to the ship's systems through this panel, but he had something else in mind. If the translation system worked both ways, he might be able to use it to send a message. He began solving puzzles again, but this time with a pattern of his own. He deliberately made specific mistakes that, when viewed as a whole, formed Earth's numerical coordinates and a simple message in binary code. Hostile intent. Prepare. He had no way of knowing if his message would reach Earth or if anyone would understand it. But it was something. A small act of resistance. Later that night, Zorvin visited his cell alone. The lead researcher studied him silently for a long time. You interest me, human, she said finally. Your species is chaotic, disorganized, and primitive by our standards. Yet you demonstrate abilities we did not anticipate. Alan sat cross-legged on the floor looking up at her. Maybe your standards need revision. Perhaps, Zorvin admitted, surprising him. The Council fears what humans might become. I begin to wonder if that fear is warranted or misplaced. Fear is an interesting thing, Alan said. Humans fear too. But we've learned to work with our fears rather than be controlled by them. Zorvin's skin darkened. You believe we are controlled by fear. Alan chose his words carefully. I believe your society values control so highly that anything unpredictable seems dangerous. Humans are very unpredictable even to ourselves. Yet, this unpredictability has survival value, Zorvin said almost to herself. Your adaptability is remarkable. That's because we've had to adapt to survive, Alan explained. Earth is a dangerous place. We evolved facing predators, natural disasters, climate changes. Being rigid would have killed us. Zorvin seemed to consider this. The terminal protocol begins in 3 cycles. I would prefer to learn more before it commences. Alan felt a chill at the reminder of his deadline. I'm happy to tell you anything you want to know about humans. In exchange, I'd like to learn more about your people. An exchange of knowledge? Zorvin seemed intrigued by the concept. Yes, this approach has merit. As she left, Alan wondered if he had found an ally, or at least someone who might delay whatever terminal protocol meant long enough for him to find a way home. The Zoraxians had started this experiment thinking they would break a human. Instead, they might end up learning why that was impossible. 2 days remained before the terminal protocol. Alan had spent hours talking with Zorvin, sharing stories about Earth and human history. In return, she told him about Zoraxian culture. Their planet had few natural disasters and no large predators. Their society had evolved with minimal threats, leading to remarkable technological advancement but little adaptability. Your species confuses us, Zorvin admitted during their latest conversation. You fight among yourselves yet unite against outside threats. You destroy your environment, yet work to save it. You are full of contradictions. Alan smiled. Contradictions make us human. We contain multitudes, as one of our poets said. Zorvin's skin rippled with colors Alan had come to recognize as thoughtfulness. The Council believes these contradictions make you dangerous and unpredictable. And what do you believe? Alan asked. Before she could answer, alarms began to sound throughout the ship. The lights in Alan's cell flashed red and he could see Zoraxians moving quickly outside his cell. Vekthar rushed in, his skin nearly white with what Alan had learned was fear. The human vessel approaches. They have found us. Alan felt a surge of hope. His message had worked, or perhaps his emergency transponder had been detected. Either way, Earth had found him. You should let me talk to them, Alan said calmly. Human. Military protocols will be aggressive if they believe I'm being harmed. Vekthar ignored him, turning to Zorvin. We must implement the terminal protocol now. The Council's orders are clear. No human can return to Earth with knowledge of our existence. Zorvin looked at Alan, her large eyes unreadable. The subject has provided valuable data. Termination seems wasteful. The decision is not yours to make, Vekthar said sharply. Prepare the neural disintegrator. Alan's heart raced, but he kept his face calm. That would be a mistake, Commander. If I don't return, they'll assume the worst. If I do return, I can tell them you were conducting peaceful research. It wasn't entirely true, but Alan needed to give Zorvin a reason to side with him. He had sensed her growing fascination with humans, her questioning of the Council's fear. The ship shuddered, hit by something from outside. The glass of Alan's cell cracked slightly. Your weapons cannot harm our vessel, Vekthar said, but he didn't sound confident. Are you sure about that? Alan asked. Humans are very good at figuring out how to break things. It's one of our specialties. Another blast rocked the ship. The lights flickered and Alan saw his chance. The crack in the glass had widened and the control panel for his cell door was exposed. While the aliens were distracted, he moved quickly to the panel and pressed the sequence he had seen them use countless times. The door slid open. Vekthar turned, his skin white with alarm. Containment breach. Security to detention level. But Alan wasn't trying to escape. Instead, he walked calmly toward Zorvin. You need to make a choice now. Kill me and start a war with humanity, or let me help create peace between our species. Zorvin looked at him, then at Vekthar. The Council fears what they do not understand. Perhaps there is another approach. The ship rocked again. A voice came over the communication system speaking in English. Attention alien vessel. This is Captain Laura Bell of the United Earth Fleet Ship Endeavour. Release Lieutenant Alan Hayes immediately, or we will take further action. Alan smiled at the sound of a human voice. The transponder had worked after all. "Let me speak to them," he said again. "Before this gets worse." Zorvin made a decision. "Take him to communications." "This violates Council directive," Vekthar began. "The directive has already failed." Zorvin cut him off. "The humans have found us. We must adapt to this new reality." Alan almost laughed at her choice of words. The Zoraxian was learning human thinking. They rushed through corridors as the ship continued to shake from the human vessel's attacks. The Zoraxian Communications Center was a large room with screens showing the space around them. Alan could see the Earthship, much smaller than the Zoraxian research vessel but clearly causing damage. Zorvin activated the communication system. "Speak," she told Alan. "This is Lieutenant Alan Hayes," he said clearly. "Captain Bell, hold your fire. I am unharmed and attempting diplomatic contact." There was a pause before Captain Bell responded. "Lieutenant Hayes, we've been searching for you for over a month. Are you under duress?" "Negative, Captain. The situation is complex but can be resolved peacefully. The Zoraxians have been studying humanity. They were afraid of us, but I think we've reached an understanding." He looked at Zorvin as he said this. She stepped forward. "I am lead researcher Zorvin of the Zoraxian Imperium. We apologize for taking your officer without permission. We did not understand human protocols." That was an understatement, but Alan appreciated her attempt at diplomacy. "We request a formal meeting," Alan said to Captain Bell. "The Zoraxians have advanced technology and scientific knowledge that could benefit Earth. I believe a peaceful exchange would serve both species." The communication went silent as Captain Bell considered this. Finally, she responded. "We're sending a shuttle. You and one Zoraxian representative may board for preliminary talks." Vekthar had entered the communication center, his skin still showing signs of distress. "The Council will not approve this contact." "The Council is not here," Zorvin replied. "I will represent our people and take full responsibility." As they prepared to board the Earth shuttle, Alan looked at Zorvin. "You wanted to know what makes humans unbreakable. It's not that we don't feel fear or pain or doubt. It's that we keep going despite them. We hope when there's no reason to hope. We find meaning in suffering. We turn enemies into allies when possible." Zorvin's skin showed a color Alan had never seen before, a soft purple that seemed to indicate a new emotion. The Council sought to understand how to break humans. Instead, we learned why it cannot be done. This knowledge may save both our species. As they boarded the Earth shuttle, Alan felt both exhaustion and triumph. The Zoraxians had tried to break a human and failed. Instead, they had created an opportunity for something new. Humans didn't just survive challenges, they transformed them into possibilities. Years later, the Zoraxian-human scientific exchange would become the foundation for Earth's peaceful expansion into the galaxy. The story of Lieutenant Alan Hayes would be taught in schools on both planets, a reminder that understanding was more powerful than fear. The Zoraxian Council eventually revised their classification of humanity in their galactic database. The UIN new entry read simply, "Approach with respect and openness. Species demonstrates remarkable capacity for transformation under pressure. Traditional containment strategies not recommended. Diplomatic alliance strongly advised." It was the highest compliment they could give.